be able to find where the trading post was by the fact that they could sight on these two rocks. Make sense?
Yeah.
So those were important rocks. Now they're just tourist attractions now, and the one downtown is hardly ever seen because the city's in front of it, but it's still there. So first here, trading here at St. Ignace, then it moved across here, then from there it moves out to the island. Okay. So, and the French all through this area, naming things, and they existed with Native Americans without too much trouble. They all got along very well, okay? Because, yes, in documents, the French always called them the sauvage, and we translated savages, bloodthirsty, barbarian state, but that wasn't it. To them, they were sauvage in the sense of the 18th century, men of nature, men who coexisted with each other, men who lived in harmony with nature. That was sauvage to them. So it's not a derogatory term, as we would think. Because we speak English and we always think that. So, and we know so much about the Native American history here in the Great Lakes area because after the English took control and the Americans would take control in the 90s, the fur trade is very important. And the Native Americans are important to the fur trade. So they're the ones who do the actual trapping. There are very few people who are really trappers, most of them are traders. So in order to keep them trapping, you need to keep their cultural system alive. So we encouraged it. We didn't encourage them to come in and start farming. We didn't encourage them to become like us. That wouldn't have done us any good. Because we wanted them to go fur trading. So, and then Schoolcraft, the Indian agent for the Americans in the North, in 18 teens and right on up to the 1840s he marries into the tribe and begins recording all the legends and everything he can find out about how they lived and how they organized and what they did. And also during the French occupation, the Jesuit priests traveled through here, across the were trying to convert people to Christianity. Okay? And they kept records. Each year they sent a report back to the mother house in Quebec City about what they did, what they had seen, who they had talked to, what customs and things they had observed. And that went back, and it's known as the Jesuit Recollections, and it was like, it's online now, you can find it. They finally put them up each year, and they've been published over the years in a complete section. And they published them right up until the French left, the French government left. So they also gave, between Schoolcraft and these records, we know a whole lot about the Native American cultures and customs of the Great Lakes, plus their history too. So, look them up online.
Did they also comment on the fur trade? I'm kind of curious.
They were always in. The Jesuits tried to help preserve the Native American culture, and the one thing that undermined it was the introduction of alcohol. Okay? And there was a great demand for it because Native Americans, it has been explained to me, like to go on a vision quest. They get a name and they have an experience. And they have to go into the forests and live for a while and not eat anything and not drink and come to a near starvation thing where you get an out-of-body experience. And you can get that instantly with alcohol. So when they would trade, and even for small amounts of alcohol, they would collect it, everybody would donate it, and then they'd have some type of contest, and whoever won it got the whole thing, because they got to have the experience. And it's an addictive drug, so it became a problem, and as it became more easily available, they wanted it. And if you want to trade the furs, and you don't have any ethics, you can just meet them in the woods and give them the alcohol. I suppose you can do the same thing today. You can buy drugs someplace. Okay, it's an addictive experience. And I was watching some program on television. Let me think what it was. They were talking about the curse of alcohol. It was an English program. They were talking about gin and gin houses and gin things at the end of the 1700s and what an evil and how many people suffered from the alcoholism that was introduced by cheap gin everywhere. And he just said, instead of gin, instead of the alcohol, put in the word drugs, put in the word amphetamine, put in the word cocaine, put in those words. And you see, it's a different drug of choice, but it's still the same problem. It's been a problem, and it still appears it's going to be. That's not a commentary on times, it's just a historic fact. So, and I suppose the same thing could be said about alcohol. Native Americans weren't the only ones who abused it. Fur traders did it themselves. They came in, people. So, I'd like to say, fortunately, it's no longer a problem, but yeah, it is. Well,
what I'm wondering about is if a lot of New World agricultural adventures had kind of a boom and bust profile. And I'm wondering if the fur trade followed a similar sort of pattern, or if the war kind of,
the wars would interfere with it because the furs would stock up here. Native Americans, the fur trade's out there. They're collecting the furs and they're bringing them to the trading post. But getting them back to Europe, okay, across the ocean, sometimes becomes a problem because the naval battles, naval control. And when they get back to Europe, sometimes there's problems there and there's no demand for them because there's a recession there. So it comes back here and you're told, okay, beaver pelts were rated in how valuable they were compared to the skin of an adult male deer, a buck, okay? And a buck skin was worth 2 female deer skins, doe skins. So everything was valued in bucks then, okay? A musket would cost you maybe 25 bucks. You could get a beaver pelt was worth $5, okay, or 10 bucks, depending on the size of the beaver pelt. I got an allergy to them when I got stung by 15 of them.
it's moved along.
It's moved along, okay. So they would come in with the beaver pelts, they would trade them in, and they would expect to get the same value they got last year. But because of the market, they weren't as valuable. So it was difficult to try to explain to the people who had gotten this price last year, so much flour, because they didn't just, the thing about trading for beads, that was like kind of made up for movies. Okay, beads were involved in the trade, but as a side thing. They liked them for decorations, they liked them to put on things, but it wasn't, they wanted manufactured products, buckets. They preferred copper buckets or tin buckets to iron buckets, but iron buckets and pots were really cheap, but they broke more easily. A tin bucket or a copper bucket you could patch, you can't really do anything with cast iron ones. So they wanted those, they wanted knives, which were easily consumed. They wanted cloth, because wool cloth is really a lot nicer in the winter or in the rain than the skin of animals, buckskins. Okay, too many movies convince us that's what they wore all the time. No, a jacket made out of buckskin might have been helpful. Leggings made out of buckskin might have been helpful as you walk through the brush. Try going into a secondary growth forest sometime. See what you look like when you come out. Want to wear your shorts in? I had to take my dog for a walk in Rouge Park yesterday. Okay, it's across the street from my daughter's house, and it was like, I'm not going in that tall grass.
Yeah.
The dog's not either. Get out of there.
Yeah.
So, but they wanted supplementary things. They would trade for flour. Okay, although they could grow wheat themselves, they still had to grind it with a pestle, and if you could get a sack of flour, you were better off. It was faster. Or other things. They did harvest wild rice. They used that as a grain. But there were a lot of things that came from a trading post that they wanted. Then, at the end, if they still had buying power left, they could get beads or mirrors or magnifying glasses. Magnifying glass was a preferred way of starting a fire, as opposed to rubbing the sticks together. And they didn't really rub sticks together like this. They had a bow, and they put a stick down, wrapped it around it, and they would move the bow back and forth, and this would spin, and it would get a wood plank, which had already a hole in it, hot, and then it would feed. Okay. So, but anyway, back to, there were notoriously at 1705 there was a complete drop in the value of beaver pelts because of the war in Europe, and there were real problems. Some merchants got killed. Okay, you were trying to cheat us. You're trying to cheat us. You're trying to cheat us. No. We'll just take the stuff. Okay. Well, there you are in the middle of nowhere.
The drop in price was due to the difficulty in transportation.
It's like any economic thing. That's a problem. Another problem is the economy in Europe. Okay, the demand for it. Fashions changed. In 1830, the bottom just stopped because instead of beaver hats, they started wearing stretched silk hats, top hats, and after that, the demand, there's still a demand. You can still get a beaver hat today. See, this is a wool felt hat. Okay, this one cost 130 bucks. Okay, a beaver hat of this size is $600. But we're in the military, we would have never had beaver hats. We would have always had wool felt hats because they were less expensive than beaver. So yes, you can still get them today. Stetson makes them. You can go online and find them.
The famous Lincoln hat was beaver, wasn't there?
The what?
The Lincoln's famous hat, I believe.
Oh,
His
that-
hats were mostly beaver.
His
his top hats.
early ones might have been, but by the 1740s and 50s, he was wearing a silk one. I saw them in his house. I saw his house in Springfield. If you haven't seen that, that's really nice. I mean, he was doing pretty well as a lawyer. Even in today's terms, that was a nice house. It was pretty good size, nice rooms. And it had some of the hats on display, and I did notice at the time that they were the stretched silk type. And also, there was a shorter, tall silk hat because when people died and got buried, they liked, in a lot of cases, they liked to bury them with a hat on. But the tall hat was way too tall to fit in the coffin without a lot of expense, so they designed a hat that looked like a top hat, but was only about 4 inches high, so it would set against the top end of the casket, and they were called dead men's hats. Okay. You'll see them around. A lot of steampunk people are wearing them. Okay. They've become popular, and I think they became popular at that time also because they were lower crowns, but that's what the original purpose was. That's what they were designed for to start with. Just thought I'd throw that out there.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks for stopping. I like talking. It's like, thank you.
The limousines of the 20s and 30s sometimes would have a netting in the passenger compartment where gentlemen could put their hats and hang them upside down from the inside of the roof of the car.
It's an easier way to take care of them. Okay, I've got some Civil War hats and these hats, and I got another straw hat that I didn't bring out. It's back in my car in case it gets hot. But it's easier for me to put it on something with the crown down. It'll maintain itself. It keeps people from setting on it too. It's always a problem. They don't do that in cars. They have that little pouch behind the seats now that you can slide caps into. You take your baseball cap and slide it in with the brim down,
right. Yeah.
and it holds those. You put 2 or 3 together instead of leaving them on the seat. And I noticed if you leave them on the seat, somebody gets in your car and it ends up on the floor, and they say, "Oh, I didn't see it." And I said, "Okay, that's okay. It was a white hat, not anymore." Wagons going past. Yeah. Bonjour, bonjour. Comment ça va? Horses make so much noise and things here. That's another thing. As long as you're filming, I'll tell you this other story. My great-grandmother, she lived to be 99. And when I was young, up till 14, she was born in 1853. So I talked to her as a little kid. She would tell me stories about early Detroit. And I had her in the car one time, and we were driving downtown, and I said, it's really smelly with all the exhaust from the cars. She looked at me and said, "This isn't smelly. You should have been down here on a hot summer day before cars, when all the horses were here." She said, "It was hot. You couldn't open your house windows because over the whole city there was a golden haze hung because the horses pooped in the street. And it dried out really fast. Then the wagon wheels rolled and the horses walked on it. It ground up the poop. It was full of fibers, and the wind picked it up and blew it, so Detroit had a golden haze hanging it over all summer. And it settled on everything like dust. And if you left your windows to your house open, it would come in and get in the drapes, get on the rugs, get on everything. So the houses were closed up. So we put that's why part of the reason they put big porches outside, so they go outside and set. But you still got golden dust on. He said, "No, Harry, no, it wasn't nicer then." Just turn the air conditioning back on.
In myriad ways, it wasn't nicer. It wasn't nicer back then. And the invention of
the internal combustion engine and the automobile it's a great thing for horses. They live 2 or 3 times longer than they used to.
Actually, I saw some figures that said there are more horses now in the United States than there was when they were being used as a means of transportation. They're mostly used for pleasure craft now.
Yes.
But something else was, and one of the reasons internal combustion gasoline-powered engines took over so fast. I mean, it was like they got them, they started making them, pretty soon everybody had them everywhere, was because the gas companies, the oil companies, produced kerosene and sold it for kerosene lamps, which in the 1890s, before everybody started to be electrified, was how you illuminated your houses, particularly out in the suburbs, in the country, in the farmland, all across the country. And you went to a general store, and they had kerosene, and it came in every half-gallon or gallon containers. And that was delivered there by the oil companies. Now, all of a sudden, the oil companies can stop burning off gasoline as a waste product and put it in cans and send it right along with the kerosene to every general store across the entire country. And now, if you have an internal combustion powered engine, you don't have to worry about where you're going to get fuel. It's everywhere. And the comparison is, people are hesitant to get electric cars because of the lack of charging stations. But where am I going to get a charge if I'm in northern Montana or in the Upper Peninsula? Internal combustion didn't have that problem. The answer was, any place that sells kerosene has gasoline. Feel confident to buy one of our internal combustion engine cars, sir. So, same kind of thing. All right, any other questions?
That thing there, that means you're an officer?
Yes, this was called a gorget.
Oh, okay.
It's the last piece of a suit of armor. It covered your throat. It was called the gorge. Okay, that's the gorget, and that showed that you were, well, the knights were usually the officers, and we're French, so we always have the king's crest on it. The English have either the king's crest or their own personal crest. And the Americans didn't have any crest on it; they just had one. Because we didn't have a king to have a crest, and we didn't have our own personal crests. That would be considered aristocratic. So that was what you don't want to do with a democratic army.
And so most infantrymen wore them, or was it only select units?
Only officers.
Only officers.
It's a symbol that I'm an officer. Hence the name, the brass. Almost all of them were brass. Okay. Sometimes you'll see. Sometimes if you were rich enough, you got one out of gold, but mostly not, because it gets banged around a lot. You might have a fancier one for dress. This one takes a lot of abuse. It's like they don't polish it all winter. It takes all winter to get it clean. You got to strip it down, get all the stuff off of it. And this is a solid piece, but it's yeah, that's what we wore. It didn't matter that you didn't need to know what my rank was. It was enough that you knew if I was an officer. Okay, the civilians knew you were an officer, and they didn't care what your rank was. Okay. Or it was a small town or small garrison, they just knew who you were. The soldiers were expected just to know you, and if they didn't, well, it's like today. If you're an officer and the rest of the guys are enlisted, it doesn't matter what your rank is. You're an officer, they're not. That sounds kind of derogatory, but it's not. I mean, enlisted people are very important to the military, but there's still a class distinction. Okay. I remember when I was in on the weekend, I was an officer. I finished my work at 5 o'clock. I could just leave the base. The soldiers that were there required a pass to leave the base. I don't know how it works today anymore. It's been years since I was in, but they all had to have a pass, and we could just come and go. Also, we were free to, if we were had gone someplace for the weekend, and we're coming home on an airplane, and the aircraft was full, and there were enlisted personnel who couldn't get on it, we were supposed to give up our seats to them. Because we could just call and say, hey, I can't get back, there's no room on the airplane, I'll be in tomorrow morning. That was fine. Okay. If they didn't come back, they were absent without leave, they got into trouble. It was our job to constantly look out for them. Okay. So.
Well, thank you very much.
Well, you're welcome.
Been very generous with your time.
Oh, hey, I retired in 14, okay. I miss talking about history.
How many encampments like this do you do in the average summer?
Hey, Rich, hi. I'm an old person, okay? I'm 78, so I don't go to too many now. But I think 5 this summer. Okay. Before, when we were younger, would go, you could probably do 10. There's one reenactment that goes, sometimes 2 or 3, every weekend from beginning of May right on up till the middle of October, and then they shift further south. But now they're not all colonial. I mean, there are Civil War reenactments, there are War of 1812 reenactments, there are World War II reenactments, they're even doing Vietnam War reenactments. There was one over in Chesterfield today. Okay, I don't like going to the Vietnamese War ones because I got to fight in that war, so I don't really want to go back and relive it.
Oh, wow.
Okay. But the other ones, I can handle that.